Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast, where the art and science of operational excellence come to life through captivating stories of triumph, challenge, and transformation from the front lines of industry. Our distinguished guests, from manufacturing pioneers and medical device innovators to aerospace visionaries, diagnostic lab leaders, and major capital project leaders, unveil the hidden patterns and powerful insights that drive exceptional results in the complex world of operations. Join us on this journey of discovery as we explore the brilliant minds behind the systems that make our world work and uncover the leadership secrets that could revolutionize your approach to operations forever. This podcast is brought to you by the Operations Science Institute, the home of the science behind every operation. If you want to be a better operations or project leader, discover the principles of operations science for yourself. For a quick tour, visit the OSI Insider portal. The web address is insider.opscience.org. And be sure to check out the new book, Operations Science Applied, available on Amazon. Here is your host, Ed Pound.
Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast. Today's guest lives where the real world collides with the plan, where marketing wants a new look for every season, customers want a date they can trust, and the factory wants stability without sacrificing speed. She leads supply chain and operations for a contract manufacturer that turns formulas, fragrances, and packaging into products you recognize instantly. And she's seeing what happens when organizations try to manage a dynamic system to a single static number. In a world of high SKU complexity or part complexity and constant change, she's pushed a simple but powerful shift. Stop arguing about a standard lead time, start committing to the best achievable date, and then hit it. We will talk about how to remove noise that creates churn across operations and finance, and how leaders build systems that deliver better performance with less stress. Please welcome to the Operations Science Podcast, Kim Shelby. Hi, Kim. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you.
Glad to have you on. I know from our initial conversations, it's going to be a topic that a lot of people will find highly useful. So before we get into that, give us a brief overview of your current job responsibilities and your primary challenges.
Of course, of course. Well, as you stated, I run the supply chain and operations organization for a top contract manufacturer. It is my third role in the organization. I was able to come in here as the vice president of customer service, and then that led into roles with supply chain and operations for one of our divisions that was very devoted to cleaning and food. And then now I'm in the personal care division. And just as you said, right, the challenges are frequent SKU changes, highly regulated industry. Our customers want the newest. Change is not like something that we try to avoid. It's a feature in our personal care division. And we deal with those challenges, working for a way to improve operations as well as satisfy our customers.
Yeah, we will definitely explore those challenges more. Talk a little bit, though. That's interesting. You came from customer service. What was the big change? Had you had experience in supply chain before? What was your biggest adaptation moving into that role?
I had about 15 years of supply chain operations in a previous role. And what I came in here to do was really kind of tie up our process. We kind of grew up through acquisition. And when you grow up through acquisition, you have 17 acquisitions and 17 ways to enter an order and handle customers. And I was brought in to streamline that and develop SOPs.
Okay. So when you're looking at constant change, obviously in cleaning and food is different. Were you familiar with that type of environment? Because that seems like it's basically everything's new every year. Was that an adaptation that you had to make?
It was definitely an adaptation. I had some experience with demand volatility, working ice melt. And that is definitely very volatile, especially because it's so heavily dependent upon the weather. And I really kind of earned my stripes there. And I was able to use that in the environment here, which is not necessarily weather driven, but just demand driven. You know, everyone wants the new scent, the glitter. So yeah, definitely an adaptation.
Very interesting. So, you mentioned that you had this issue where lead time is a static number applied to a dynamic situation. What did you see for those challenges, and what did you come up with in terms of how to deal with that? Wanting a static number, but also wanting to have products delivered on time.
So the biggest issue that I saw was that there was this hyper focus on the day that something was to produce. And that production date does not equal ready for the customer, especially in an environment like ours. You have to go through QA. There might be some testing involved, some micro testing. And so while there was this, complete focus on the production date, I said, no, we need to focus on when it's ready for the customer, whether it's ready on our dock for them to come get it, or whether it's ready at their dock if it's in kind of a prepaid environment. And that was probably the biggest lesson was let's stop hyper focusing on this production date, because if the production date moves 1 or 2 days, customers like, oh no, the production date moved, when truly you could still be meeting that promise date, that due date that we talk about.
Indeed. I mean, in operations science, we talk about that a lot. That's basically a time buffer to your point. If it's late 1 day or 2 days, I mean, if you're talking about supplies for an operating room, yeah, it makes a big difference. But perfume, I don't know. Does it make a difference if it's, late 1 day or another? What was your experience with that change when people started saying, oh, let's look at the due date?
The issue that we saw the most of was, well, then we're going to pad the date. So we would be like, well, we're going to add an extra 5 days for this component to come in and an extra 5 days for production, and then an extra this. And it turns out, everyone knows what happens there, right? Your inventory blows up, your finished goods blow up. And so we took a step back and said, no, we need to have this as tight and as close as possible. And we have worked very hard to do that and have had some success.
So with the production date, I mean, that's very interesting because one of my recent podcasts was with a guy I worked with who's in semiconductor. And semiconductor, they have a common practice that you have to meet your starts. And that's basically the same as saying, I have to hit my production date. The production date is set by the schedule. And the thinking is that, oh, if I don't start it, I won't finish it on time. And then what happens is they don't look at the status of the production system. And so they end up flooding production with WIP. How did you manage the dynamics of work in process and making that switch from the production date to the delivery date?
We're primarily in a make to order environment. And so that makes it pretty easy not to build up because we weren't reacting till we received the order. Several of our largest customers that are make to forecast, but the rest of the orders are coming in as make to order.
Right. But I mean, even if it's make to order, if you have 20 orders and your capacity, you can only do 10 and you decide to start them anyway, that can cause its own set of problems. Was there any change in looking at WIP control by making that switch from the production date to the delivery date?
The change is a little bit surprising, but yes, there was one big change. And what we started looking at was we started measuring what I call the gap. So the gap between when the customer wanted it and when we actually committed to it, that due date quoting. And we started looking at those gaps. And if it was a large strategic customer for us and that gap was large, we would actually look at it and say, you know what, we probably do need to start this order a little bit earlier, or bring in components a little bit earlier, or floor stock some of these, which sounds a little unique in a make to order environment. But that was the way we really kind of managed this many orders coming in, but still being able to meet that date. So just a little bit of a different way that we took a look at that.
Yeah. So you mentioned that term due date quoting. That's a primary control technique that we talk about in operations science, and it's tuned to what you can do. And as you mentioned, if you look at what they want and what you can quote, well, maybe you need to make some adjustments. Was that being used with a production date, or it was something that resulted as you moving to the focus on the customer delivery date?
So prior to us really making this shift, it was all lead time. It was all this standard lead time. And everything came in with 12 weeks. It didn't matter how many orders, going back to, one of your previous question. Didn't matter. We got 15 orders that day, but if it was on that line was 12 weeks, they were all due in 12 weeks.
Okay. And so then that was a switch where you had come from the customer service. So you knew the customer service people, those are the ones who were affected, right? So was there some pushback to say, well, no, we said 12 weeks and now we're just going to be quoting some random time? What were the dynamics there?
Initially, there was quite a bit of pushback because the message was delivered that, we're going to receive an order, we're going to accept when the customer wants it, but then we're going to take a look and provide the best date. And I think the way that was translated was, well, we can't have customers send us an order and we'll tell them when they're going to get it. I said, no, that's not what we're saying. So that was the initial pushback. But once they were into it, I would say within 4 months, they really started to see the benefit of that due date quoting, because prior to that, they're on production scheduling calls. They're calling the factory. When is the order? Is the order due? Is it out there? Oh, now I can call and get a truck. Whereas now they're like, no, here it's ready for you on this day.
Right. Yeah, that's a major change. And people, it's one of those things where, you make this change and it's sort of the change management dynamics. A year later, people are going, I don't know why we didn't do this, the entire time. But when you start, it's like, oh no, we can't do that. The sky is falling. Was there any reaction from the customers? Was there some dynamics in terms of managing that relationship as you went through the change?
There were initially because they would still call and ask us for, well, what is your lead time? What is your lead time? And so there was kind of this internal confusion of, well, what do I say? And so we developed with the help of our customer service group, we developed the language that said our standard lead time is, 8, 10, 12, 16 weeks, depends. But please really give us the date that you want it, and we will do our very best to make that date. And that helped change the dynamics with our customers. And once they started to see we would be ready on that date and deliver on that date, they were able to accept it because they too were in the, "Is my order ready? It's, 12 weeks." And so they did see the benefit of that pretty quickly, but there was a little bit of a hill to climb at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm sure there was. That's a fascinating experience, and I think it's one that's very valuable to people because what people think they're doing in an operations science context, everybody has variability. And so what they think they're doing by just quoting a fixed lead time is they're taking variability out of the system. But then what happens is they're not looking at the actual status of the system as we talked about. And so the first time one of them, they say, oh, it's 12-week lead time and the factory's overloaded and they can't do it, then that gets everything out of whack. And what you're actually doing with due date quoting is you're taking into account the variability and you're being predictable, which people don't think you can be predictable with variability, but you're being predictable about when you're going to deliver because you're looking at the status of the system. I think it's brilliant. That's actually a wonderful lesson for anybody to take in. So when you went through this, did you just make the decision, we're going to do this, and you just went and told everybody? I mean, because there's a lot of, the whole political consideration within an organization and the dynamics you have to work through with different personalities. Talk a little bit about how that transpired.
Of course. So the first area that we looked at was really customer service leadership because they are the most impacted by any kind of due date quoting or lead time, and got them on board. At first, there was a lot of concern, but then once they saw the system, they were very excited about it. And then sales was a little bit harder to bring on and actually declined it at first. And then what we did was we did kind of a secret pilot on 2 or 3 items. Then we presented it to the executive team and said, we've been actually using this on these 3 items, and here's been the benefit, right? We were able to shrink that, I call it cycle time, right? Between order, receipt, and shipment, shrink our cycle time. We're able to increase our OTIF, and the gap between the requested delivery date and when we actually committed to it was very small for our large customers. And so once they saw that, they were much more on board to roll this out. And it is division by division. So a couple of the divisions were using it, and still one of our divisions is still using that lead time. They have not yet converted to due date quoting.
Yeah, well, you have different levels of adaptation. It's kind of a change management curve, right? So where do you see variability showing up most in your system? Is it in production or demand or supplier?
I would say demand first, and then probably suppliers. So demand first is us looking at a long-term forecast in the personal care environment where, everyone wants the new thing and we can't sell the fall color in the summer. So definitely demand. We call it a product category 3 level. So we don't get it at the SKU level. We kind of get it as like, here's the shampoo forecast and here's this forecast. So that's the demand variability that we are faced with. And it's very hard to determine what's going to take off in the market from a personal care perspective. There's been some products that we've looked at it and said, oh, I don't know if that'll go anywhere. It turns out it's the next greatest thing. So that's definitely where the variability is. Suppliers, because there is so much variability in the products that we're making, we have a lot more suppliers. If you get like out of the cleaning and food division where 80% of what you're running is the same size can, you had less suppliers and less variability. So definitely demand for us, then supplier, and then production. Once it hits our lines, we have outstanding production facilities, and it generally goes very smoothly.
So in your role, do you also oversee production or is that a separate?
Yes.
You do. Okay. So you have the whole supply chain. Oh, that's awesome.
Mhm. It is. It is.
Yeah. So When you're looking at that demand, that variability, how do you react when somebody says, "Oh, we introduced the, product, cranberry and lime juice scent or whatever," and you don't think it's going to go anywhere, and all of a sudden it takes off? What's the reaction to that? I would think with the due date quoting, that would kind of help you adapt to that because you can only make it as fast as you can make it. How does that work?
Absolutely. You hit it right on the head there. Yes. So when the customer sees, oh, this is taking off, and they come to us and they say, hey, we know we said this was a million, but it's really 3 million. We'll look at that due date quoting versus the lead time and say, you know what, we can make this a little bit sooner because this dropped out of the schedule for whatever reason, or we're increasing OEE and actually output on this line. So that's the way we react is, when customers get what they want, right? Which is their stuff took off, and then they'll come to us and say, "When can you make it?" We do utilize that due date quoting.
Right. So are you looking at then that relationship between utilization and cycle time, which is a primary operation science relationship? Do you set a utilization goal for the line, or you just run it as fast as you can, and then, when it's out of control, then you do something about it?
Our utilization is generally set around 80%, and it's a loose goal depending upon the lines. Like, we have certain lines that we have named our motto lines, and those are the lines that we want the high utilization on. We do have some specialty lines that don't run as often as the motto lines, and the utilization rate for those has not been set yet because we tend to focus on the model lines, the ones that are running the most.
Yeah, again, that just sounds like great intuition because, well, first of all, we get that question a lot. What's the best utilization level to set my operations for? And, yeah, 85% is a pretty reasonable goal because that's where things tend to blow up. But it does depend on how much variability you have. And actually, we see in the EMS industry where they're doing printed circuit boards, I mean, their utilization is like 50%, but that works for them because their big issue is getting components. So there's not a magic number. One of the things that we encourage people to do is to use the operation science to figure out what is the right number for theirs. But, in lieu of that, people, they take a guess and then adjust accordingly. And that's pretty reasonable too. So how do you coordinate a cost? You've got compounding, filling, label and decoration and packaging. Are you looking into a little bit of the operations detail, how to manage the utilization of those separate areas so that you don't starve one or the other, or does it make any difference? Or, what's your approach there?
Oh, it absolutely makes a difference. And our approach is to really open up communication with our sales team. One of the things I found out coming into personal care is that we would quote, well, you know what, we have availability on this line. And so sales would do what sales does, go out and sell, and then it would turn out it would be one of the products that takes a long time to run or one that has, a lot of complexity to it. And so we really started to get very granular in our SIOP process to say, we have a lot of capacity for this type of product, and at least try to direct our sales team so that when they did go and win the opportunity, that they didn't come to operations and we'll say, yeah, you have 16, we can't get that for you for 16 weeks. And so sales would be like, I thought you said you had capacity on that line. And so we really got very granular and improved that communication to say, yes, on that line for these type of products.
Right, right. Yeah, that's again, that's just great intuition because there are two rules in operations science, the two major laws actually of forecasting. The first law is that the forecast is always wrong, and the second law is the forecast will always change. And to your point, some corollaries there are as you get into more detail of forecasting, it gets less accurate. So hence the salespeople like to tell you, oh, we're going to sell this much shampoo. Well, you don't make shampoo, you make bottles of particular types of shampoo. And so it's a real balancing act. And it sounds like that you guys have come up with a good approach to getting that granularity because once you're working back and forth with sales, you might have arguments about those, but you know what? Those are the things to argue about. What are we going to sell? What makes the most money? But at least it sounds like you're making well-informed decisions. And so that sounds really good. So when you're looking at your organization, what are the biggest misunderstandings that you see about lead time and cycle time and, what's driving which one?
So the biggest misunderstanding of lead time, it's the right thing for the customer. We have seen where we had a line that had an 8-week lead time, and then the line got over capacity. And then we started quoting 10 weeks, 12 weeks. And as we're quoting these higher lead times, our OTIF performance kept increasing, but there was no improvement in our service level. It was the line just kept getting, more and more utilized, capacity shrunk. And we would say, okay, well, now it's 12 weeks. And our OTIF kept going up, but our cycle time was lengthening and customers were more dissatisfied. But the measures that we were using to measure that was OTIF, and that kept increasing. And that's when we identified something this is not working. Because if next week the lead time is 14 weeks, OTIF's still going up, but customers are still unhappy and we were not solving the issue.
Okay, so but it sounds like though if you don't have enough capacity, your cycle times are going to increase, right?
They could. But what the lead time does is basically assigns that static number to it's 12 weeks, doesn't matter. So then what happens is when you take a look at what we're running, we can look at it and say, oh, this runs great if we can put this right after it. There's less cleanup time. We can compound these together. And us looking at due date quoting allowed us to do that. So some of the orders were, well, oh, we can get this in 6 weeks. Yep, this one is 13 weeks. This one is, and that's the way we were able to do it. Plus, with some of our components coming in, we may need to buy, a drum of this particular fairy dust, a drum of fairy dust. And it turns out the next time that we have some of this left. And so that longest lead component that caused that lead time to be 16 weeks, it's not applicable to that situation because we have some left from the previous run.
Right. Okay, so the utilization goes up, lead times go out, you're still shipping on time in full, but customers aren't happy because they have to wait longer. And so you stepped in and got a little bit more granularity on that and were able to, fit some orders in that didn't fit. Well, because of the due date, you weren't looking at just the lead time, you were just looking at when can we make it and then communicating that to the customer.
And operations got longer runs and they were happy about that. So OE went up and yeah, so the plant managers were definitely pleased about that.
So you mentioned it's mostly make to order, so you don't have stock inventory, but still, I'm curious what happened with financial performance, particularly cash flow, when you made the change.
And improved because we were able to turn the orders faster. So when you're quoting lead time, and say your lead time is 12 weeks, generally that really means anywhere between 8 and 14 weeks. And so what was happening was customer service was almost literally waiting until the product was out on the dock to say, customers come pick it up. Well, with due date quoting, and for the plants that have the higher performance against that, they are comfortable enough calling the customer and saying, your order is running on April 2nd. Can you arrange your truck today? And then that way, if the truck is coming in on April 2nd, we're getting that invoice, improving cash flow. Whereas before they would wait until April 2nd. Okay, customer, please contact your carrier, adding 3 or 4 more days.
Wow. Well, that certainly communicates to your customer that you have good control over your system, which inspires confidence. So, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently, if anything?
I would take a lot more time explaining the difference. There is still some misunderstanding in how due date quoting works, what we look at. So I would take much more time and actually have a much larger pilot. And even if it had to be like our little secret pilot that we were running, I would definitely expand that so that we went out to explain it to our executive team, our sales team, customer service. Again, most pushback at the beginning, but once they saw it, they benefited from it. But I would definitely take more time to teach exactly what was happening because there was such a misunderstanding of what we were really trying to measure.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, that sounds like a good lessons learned. Well, let's change topics just a little bit and talk about, the hottest topic these days, which is AI. Are you guys using AI or you plan to use it? What's the status there?
I would say, like most companies, both. So we're using it quite heavily in customer service. For example, we'll get, a lot of requests for forms, and these forms are readily available. And so we have AI where it actually takes the email, gets the form, emails it back, and we just see a report at the end of the week that tells us how many times this was done. Prior to that, there was a person, right, answering the email, looking up the form. So there's considerable savings there. Also looking at knowledge bases in customer service so that, we get asked a question, can this product do X or what size cans do you offer? You know, we have that in a knowledge base where they can actually go type in their question and get that information back. So customer service has quite a bit of it. In our supply chain, we are looking at AI to automatically order. We're starting with some of our lower value items where it's going to kind of scrape SAP, look at what we need to, consolidate that demand, and issue that to our vendors. And we're very excited about that.
That's a significant step. I mean, that's taking an active role in the business. Have you piloted that yet? I'm curious about any results. Have you seen that?
We're close to piloting it. We don't expect to pilot that until I think it's May 15th is our first pilot. I have to look at the calendar, but it's middle of May.
Well, that's pretty close. I'll be interested to hear how that goes because everybody, as you mentioned, everybody's trying to feel their way through it and figure out what happens. One of my experiences over 30 years, 30 plus years in operations supply chain is that one of the issues you see across a value chain is every time you put a planner in the loop, you increase variability. Not because the planner is trying to do a bad job or anything, or they had something nefarious going on. It's just the fact that they will consolidate orders and they're not looking across the entire supply chain. And one of the thoughts I've always had about AI, and I don't know if I've seen that application yet, is the ability to look across the supply chain and optimize the total supply chain rather than the local optimization that goes on. Have you thought about that or seen anything like that?
So that's exactly what we're looking to do is to take instead of just, when it's scraping SAP, AI is scraping SAP, that it's going to take the need for the entire supply chain versus what we're doing today, which is this region needs this, here's, buy this, this region needs this, buy this. We're consolidating all that and issuing one PO. So we get the better costs, right? Ordering more, it's a better cost, and our vendors are also liking that.
Yeah, I bet they do. Definitely. All right. Well, that's very practical and good applied information. I appreciate you sharing that. Let's switch a little bit and talk about Kim Shelby, the woman. Where'd you grow up and what was your childhood like? How'd you get to where you are today?
I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I've pretty much stayed in the same area my entire life. Uh, Typical, blue collar family. And I actually got my first job driving a roll clamp truck in the warehouse. And I really thought that was going to be my job.
Wow. Wait a minute. Roll clamp truck.
So if you think it was in a corrugated box manufacturing plants in these gigantic rolls, and we would go on the rail car and pick up the roll, turn it over, drive it back out and deliver it to the line. And I remember the first time I did it, I was just terrified because anytime you load a rail car, it drops right about it. It feels like 2 feet. But that was my role. And I was getting just, as I went through my career, I was just getting higher up areas of responsibility. And I had a manager and a great mentor that came to me and said, I think there's a role in customer service and I'd like you to think about taking it. And I thought, why would I do that? And so, he said, just go try it and see what you like. And I went up there and upstairs, right? Customer service upstairs. I'm in the warehouse downstairs. And I immediately saw the entire process, all the way from how they got an order. And then, of course, I had already been familiar with the back end, which was shipping the order. And it just how interconnected this process was just amazing to me. So that was kind of my first foray into customer service. And I was able to get into a great company, Chicago-based company, where they hired me in as their customer service manager for a pretty new area they were going into. It was an old company, and all of their demand was pretty much a straight line. And then they went into ice melt, and that demand was not a straight line, and they were really struggling with how to manage that. So I was brought in to kind of nail down the customer service, especially for the big box customers, who wanted nothing, 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 400 truckloads tomorrow, nothing, 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 all depended on what it snowed. And that was just a wonderful opportunity for me, develop the SIOP process there, and then really started getting increasing roles where I was taking over operations, the full supply chain. And I love seeing the entire process and how interconnected. And I am still surprised today, when I'll talk to, this plant manager about customer service. Yeah, that's customer service. No, they're connected. They're the ones that are giving you all the signals. And so I just love when people make that connection. And I love when they get as excited about it as I did.
Yeah, listen to your description, a couple of things that jump out at me. One of them is the role of mentors. This is probably, I don't know, our 25th or something podcast, but when you have this discussion, it's really interesting to hear people talk about the role of people influence in their lives and how important that is. So For people in the audience, I encourage them to take an active role and be a mentor to someone and also accept mentorship because there's just great insight to be gained through that. That's one thing. The other thing I'm wondering is, I mean, did you just figure all this out on your own, which would be amazing? Or was there a particular intellectual experience, training, education, or something that set your foundation?
Oh, I would have loved it to be, a training. It was really just more being in the trenches, right, with customers complaining about this and, really kind of digging through and okay, what matters to them, and I started also to apply it to my own life. You go buy a car and it's a standard car, you could probably get it in a week, but if I want, a purple car, it's 5 to 6 weeks, and if I get it within 5 to 6 weeks, I'm generally pretty happy. And so that was the way, just really being in the trenches and also applying the lessons to my own life.
Wow, that's very impressive because a lot of people learn bad habits on the way out, and it sounds like you've sussed out intuitively the way that operations behave and take advantage of that. That's awesome. So how do you stay sharp now? I mean, you look at books, the Operation Science podcast, for instance, courses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I do, look at the Operation Science, listen to and look at the information from the Operation Science podcasts. I also do like to read books. I stay involved in organizations. They have all these summits that you get invited to, and you can't go to all of them, but I encourage you to go to every single one you can, meet with whoever you can, walk through the vendor show. I know sometimes it's like, oh, not the vendor show, but walk through it and learn. There's things out there that I didn't know that were even out there that we could use. I learned there's a knowledge system out there. You can actually have an operator go in and say, I'm having trouble with this piece of machinery. And it'll say, oh, that is, this, and here's how you fix it. And that will definitely be something that we're looking at to employ on our floors to help our team and decrease downtime.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, particularly now with everything going on with AI, you really have to stay on the ball in terms of keeping up with what's going on. And there's a lot to learn. I've been incorporating a lot of it myself into the work that I've been doing. So outside of work, what do you do to recharge when you want to get away from work and relax?
I'm a fan of Chicago sports and love watching all kinds of sports. Also love to go to our national parks. It's just most of them don't have cell service, which I know at first I was like, oh man, that sounds terrible. But then you get there and it's actually wonderful because it forces you to disconnect and you're just in one of the most beautiful places. We're so lucky to have national parks here in the US as well as throughout the rest of the world.
Yeah, indeed. I do a backpacking trip every year, and it's with great regret that I get back to cell service and I start hearing the dinging of incoming messages, after 3 or 4 days of none of that. It's a big change. All right. Last question. If you give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would that be?
Say yes to everything. So it doesn't matter what the project is or if it's, something that may be, in a different role or outside or not part of your normal work. Say yes to everything. Sign up for projects. You'll be surprised at who you get to meet and what you get to learn. And I love just seeing how the entire system is connected.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, definitely people get worried about what they can or can't do, and you don't know what you can't do until, you give it a try. So that's excellent advice. Well, listen, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I think that's just a lot of great practical experience and advice to convey to the audience, and I know people will appreciate that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Indeed, let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Take care. Thank you.
The Operation Science podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. Join the Operation Science Institute at opscience.org. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode. The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not represent their company's views unless specifically stated as such.